In this lesson, we're going to create the pivot mechanics for our gun turret. Alright, so in the front view here, we're going to create the pivot mechanics for the gun turret, and this is just basically an object to show where the pivot point is going to be for the guns. So whenever we are creating objects in our scene, if we create a cylinder like this, you'll notice that what is happening is that the object or the cylinder is being created on 0, 0, okay, the origin line. So if we hit G on the keyboard to go to our grid, you'll see that it's always creating the one of those sides right on that origin line. And sometimes if we're trying to create that on a specific object, that can be a little confusing. We can lose it, and then what we'll have to do is we need to go to wireframe view to see the size of it and get everything together. But there's another way to create objects on top of other surfaces, and that's using the auto grid feature. So what we need to do is we need to select cylinder, and it's going to activate that building process, and then we need to check auto grid. Now whenever we hover over a surface, you'll notice that we get kind of a move tool sort of gizmo, and that's just really showing us the position of the object that's going to be created. So whenever I hover over this slanted surface, you can see that the Z direction is now kind of slanted down and toward me. But if I hover over the gun turret side, you'll see that the Z direction is straight into the gun turret. So I know that this is a flat surface. So if I click and hold and drag out this cylinder, you can see that being created right in our view. Okay, and then I release that, and this is going to allow me to drag up the height. So I'm going to take my height up to around 4 or so, and you can see that right down here. And then we're going to right click to end that creation process. Let's go ahead and bring our cylinder down and kind of put it into position. We want it to be pretty close to the middle of this turret. Okay. And we'll position it right in here. And this is going to be kind of the mechanism that pivots the guns themselves. Now it's not necessarily going to mechanically work that way with rigging or anything like that. It's just kind of a way to show that these gun turrets can pivot. Okay, just kind of an added detail. So let's go ahead and convert this to editable poly, and I'm going to delete the polygon that is on the back side of this object. So if we hit F3 and I go into wireframe view, I can select that polygon and just simply hit delete. Let's hit F3 again, and let's start working on this pivot object. So let's select that pivot or that polygon on the front, and let's just drag that forward in the Y just to kind of thin that up a little bit. And we're going to grab our scale tool by hitting R on the keyboard, and we're going to scale that down in all 3 directions just to give that a little bit of a bevel. Alright, I'm going to continue to push that in a little bit. I don't want that to stick out real far, so this looks pretty good. We're going to use our inset and extrude to kind of give us a little bit of design in this, so that way it's not so flat. So we're going to take that to about 0.5. We'll extrude, and we're going to extrude this down into a negative direction here. So we'll do negative 0.5, and I'm going to inset that again, but this time I'm going to do 0.25, and then we'll extrude outward. Okay, just like so. And I'm going to make that come out just a little bit above, so 0.75 would be a good value for us. And then I'm going to grab my scale tool and scale this down. Now you'll notice that extruding and then scaling is the same effect as using just bevel. So again, like I've been saying throughout this modeling section, there are multiple ways to getting the same result. Okay, so don't feel like you have to do one technique a specific way. There are always different techniques, okay, different ways of getting there. Okay, so what we're doing now is we're just cutting this apart to make sure that we're getting quads on our object here. Now anytime that you use that cut tool, remember you want to check to make sure you don't have any overlapping faces or overlapping vertices. So one way to do that is to go to Views, X View, Overlapping Vertices, and then with the object selected, just simply hit click here to update, and here you'll see it says 2 vertices are overlapping. Now these vertices that are overlapping should be highlighted in green. So now what we can do is we can simply select around those vertices. You can see here that 2 vertices are selected, and then all you have to do is hit weld. Now you can hit the weld settings, and you'll notice here that our threshold is set to 0.1. So that means that any vertices that are selected and they're within this distance, they will go ahead and weld. So you can see that we have before, this object has 50 vertices, and then after it's going to have 49. So we'll hit OK, and that is now welded. Here you'll see vertex 49 is selected. Alright, so let's go ahead and turn that off. And if you want, you can kind of push that a little bit into the geometry. I don't like to do it too much, but I really don't want any holes whatsoever on this. Now what I'm going to do with this is I'm going to go to my hierarchy panel and adjust its pivot, because now what we need to do is we need to make sure that all of our objects here are going to pivot along this object, just to make it look a little more realistic. Okay, so let's center the object here, and then we're going to affect pivot only, and then I'm going to apply a turbo smooth to this just to smooth it out. And just like we've been doing, 2 iterations, isoline display, and then we'll come in, show end result, and then add our geometry with Swift Loop just to harden that up. Now if you want to see that cage, remember you need to go into some form of subobject mode. So normally I just go into edge mode. Okay, let's harden this up by adding segments. Okay, and just continuing on here really quickly. And I believe that's going to give us the shape that we're looking for there. Turn off edge mode, just taking a look at that really quickly, trying to see if that's going to give me the shape that I like. I want this to harden up just a little bit more, but you'll notice that I've already added a segment right here, so why isn't it hardening up even more? Well, we need a segment on the inside as well to really tighten that up. So if you go to polygon mode and you select those polygons on the inside, just like so. Now if you can't see that, let me change the color here. So select the polygons on the inside and just do a simple inset and make that pretty small. So let's go to something like 0.1 and then hit OK. Now you'll see that on that edge it's now very nice and tight. Okay, so very hard there. Let's go ahead and change that color to black and then gray. So we've just been hitting the assign materials with that material selected. Okay, there we go. Now what we need to do at this point is we need to get our guns parented together properly, and then we need to get their pivot points set to our object. So let's go ahead and select the gun barrel, and I'm going to use select and link, and instead of clicking and holding on this object and then linking over this way, what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the H key, and this is going to bring up our select by name. Now the select by name will work differently depending on if you have select and link activated or not. So this is a great way to select and link objects more effectively. So we have our gun base, and here we have the gun base 01. So we want to make sure that gun barrel is linked to the gun base. So let's hit H on the keyboard, and we have gun base, and we'll just simply hit link. It's saying that something has happened in here. I'm just going to ignore that for now. I'm not really sure what that error is. So let's go ahead and hit our rotate tool just to check to make sure that that is linked properly, and that does look good. Alright, so now let's use the select and link, and we're going to do select by name, just clicking on that button, and it brings up the exact same thing. So now we're going to use gun base 001, and again that's coming up. I'm not really sure what that's about, but we should be okay. Alright, so now let's select these objects here, and we want to make sure that their pivot points are centered on this pivot point. I don't want them to pivot in place. So we can go to our hierarchy panel, affect pivot only, and then we can use align to align that pivot point to this object. So let's click on that pivot, and we want to make sure that the pivot point is going to be centered on this object. So you'll notice that I don't necessarily need the X position, but I do need my X, or my Y and my Z position. So let's check those, and you'll see that that pivot point moves straight back and is centered on this object. Let's hit OK. Let's do the same thing for this guy. So we're going to align that to our pivot. We have Y and Z already saved in, and we'll hit OK. Let's turn off Effect Pivot Only. And now anytime that these guns are rotated, hit E on the keyboard to go to that rotate tool. They are now rotating around that pivot, which is also centered up to pivot in our slots here. So that's the reason that we wanted to change that pivot point. Alright, good. So now that we have that set up, let's go ahead and create the pivot for the other side while we're here. So we're just going to hold down or select our object and use Mirror. We're going to make that an instance, and it's going to be in the Y direction. We'll just move that straight back. And we didn't want Y, I'm sorry about that. Should have checked that. Let's hit Mirror. Let's move that out of the way, and let's try the Z direction. There we go. Now we'll hit OK. Move that into the Z, and just position that accordingly. So just barely inside of that gun turret. Alright, good. So now that we have that gun turret built out, we need to build our landing gear, and we also need to build the canopy. I'm not sure how I overlooked that, but let's go ahead and tackle that canopy next. Alright, so I'll see you then.